Obi-Wan Kenobi defeated Darth Maul, General Grievous, Anakin Skywalker, and Darth Vader. Yet for years, the popular narrative called him an average Jedi. After examining canon sources, a very different picture emerged. Obi-Wan was not the most powerful Jedi because of overwhelming strength in the Force. His advantage was far rarer. He trusted the Force more completely than almost anyone in the Order, and that trust shaped every duel he fought, every battle he survived, and every enemy he defeated. Chapter 1: Average Jedi Myth. For years, fans and content creators repeated the same story about Obi-Wan Kenobi. He had a low midi-chlorian count. He lacked the natural Force potential of Anakin Skywalker, Yoda, or Mace Windu. His greatness came entirely from hard work and discipline, a Jedi who ground his way to the top through sheer determination alone. But the story had a problem. It was not true. No canonical source in all of Star Wars ever provided a midi-chlorian count for Obi-Wan Kenobi. The only confirmed count belonged to Anakin Skywalker, whose midi-chlorian concentration exceeded even Master Yoda's. But for Obi-Wan himself, no film, no novel, and no official reference book ever assigned a number. The entire foundation of the average Jedi narrative rested on a figure that did not exist in any official source. Yet a number did circulate. The specific figure most commonly cited online originated from a fan hoax website called Super Shadow. It was never real. In Claudia Gray's Master and Apprentice, Qui-Gon Jinn described his apprentice to the Council as strong in the Force. A master who understood what extraordinary looked like still called Obi-Wan strong. Obi-Wan only appeared average when measured against the most extreme example the galaxy had ever produced. Yet the popular misconception did contain a small truth. Obi-Wan's path to mastery was genuinely different from his peers. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's early relationship was difficult, though not for the reasons fans assumed. Qui-Gon admitted to the Council that the failure was his own. He feared they were a mismatch. Obi-Wan adhered strictly to the Jedi Code, while Qui-Gon followed his own moral compass and the living Force. Yet Qui-Gon even considered having Obi-Wan reassigned, privately reflecting that it was he who did not deserve Obi-Wan, not the other way around. A crisis on Pajal eventually solidified their bond permanently. This pairing shaped everything that followed. Qui-Gon's devotion to the living Force planted seeds in Obi-Wan that would not fully bloom for decades. The young Padawan who clung to the Jedi Code would eventually become the master who could dissolve himself entirely into the Force. But that transformation required loss first, and it required a choice that would redefine his entire approach to combat. It was never about how much potential Obi-Wan had, it was about how he used it differently from every other Jedi in the Order. That difference is what made him more powerful than they ever realized, and it began with a devastating loss on Naboo. Chapter 2: Choosing Soresu. On Naboo, in the plasma refinery complex adjacent to Theed Palace, Obi-Wan Kenobi watched his master die. The duel the fates had separated them. Darth Maul exploited the facility's cycling laser gates to split the two Jedi apart, forcing Qui-Gon Jinn to fight the Sith Lord alone in a narrow corridor. Qui-Gon had practiced Form 4, known as Ataru. It was an offensive approach defined by acrobatic leaps, wide sweeping strikes, and constant momentum. Ataru required open space to function. In the confined corridor between the laser gates, Qui-Gon's strikes and acrobatics had no room, and he tired rapidly against Maul's relentless assault. When the opening came, Maul drove his blade through Qui-Gon's torso. Obi-Wan saw it all from behind the final laser gate. He cannot reach his master in time. After defeating Maul and enduring the grief that followed, Obi-Wan made a deliberate and permanent decision. He abandoned Ataru entirely. The form that had failed Qui-Gon in that corridor demanded aggression, momentum, and open space. Obi-Wan chose the opposite path. He devoted himself to Form III Soresu, a defensive discipline built on patience, efficiency, and the willingness to let the fight come to him instead of chasing it. The contrast between the two forms could not have been sharper. Where Ataru was aggressive and acrobatic, Soresu was patient and efficient. It thrived in any environment, required no open space, and had originally been developed as a response to the growing use of blasters across the galaxy. Over generations, those deflection principles expanded into a complete combat system built around one core idea: near total defense. A Soresu practitioner kept a lightsaber close to the body in tight, precise arcs. Every deflection used exactly the energy required, and nothing more. Footwork was minimal and deliberate rather than flashy. The practitioner studied the opponent's patterns in real time, absorbing every strike while presenting no openings in return. When the enemy finally made a strike, because relentless fighters always did, Obi-Wan would be ready. One strike, one opening. That was all Soresu needed. It rewarded the Jedi who trusted the fight to reveal its own answer. The progression across Obi-Wan's career proved the commitment. The Padawan who had flipped, lunged, and attacked with raw force against Maul on Naboo became a composed Jedi who stood his ground with measured, compact blade work during the Clone Wars. His stance narrowed, his movements shrank. By the final year of the war, nothing in his technique was wasted. Form 5, known as Gemso, was Anakin Skywalker's preferred combat form. Practitioners had developed it because they felt Form 3 was too passive, turning defense into a direct counterattack through raw power. Yet the irony ran deep. Gemso had been designed to move beyond Soresu's limitations. But Obi-Wan's victory on Mustafar would later demonstrate that Soresu's patient defense could absorb those power strikes without being overwhelmed. The offensive fighter depended on momentum, and the longer a duel lasted, the wider the gap became. What Soresu alone could not account for was Obi-Wan's full power. The form kept him alive, but survival was not the same as victory. What turned Obi-Wan from a great defender into one of the most dangerous Jedi of his era was how deeply he trusted the Force in combat, letting it guide his movements rather than forcing outcomes. Most Jedi imposed their will in a fight. Obi-Wan allowed the Force to dictate it, and the first true test of that trust came against a Sith Lord who had already taken everything from him. Chapter 3: Eternal Nemesis. No rivalry in Obi-Wan Kenobi's life lasted longer or cost him more than his war with Darth Maul. It began on Naboo and ended on Tatooine, spanning decades and defining both warriors in ways neither could escape. When the laser gates finally opened on Naboo, Obi-Wan charged Darth Maul with everything he had. He fought recklessly, swinging without discipline. Maul exploited it effortlessly. He kicked Obi-Wan's lightsaber into the reactor shaft and left him dangling over the pit with no weapon and no leverage. The Sith Lord stood above him, savoring the moment. By every measure, the duel was over. Then something shifted. Obi-Wan found calm. In a single motion, he launched himself from the shaft, called Qui-Gon's fallen lightsaber to his hand through the Force, and cut Maul in half before the Sith Lord could react. A Padawan had struck down a Sith Lord in single combat, the first Jedi to do so in approximately 1,000 years. But Maul survived. As the Clone Wars revealed, he returned with cybernetic legs and a singular obsession: destroying the Jedi who had left him for dead. Alongside his brother Savage Opress, Maul hunted Obi-Wan across multiple engagements, and in every encounter, he targeted the same weakness. On Raydonia, Maul lured Obi-Wan into a trap by massacring civilians, captured him, and taunted him that his emotions made him vulnerable. He was right. Every time Maul provoked that vulnerability, Obi-Wan's Soresu weakened. It was the weapon most Jedi never learned to survive, and the very weakness that would one day make him stronger than all of them. Then, Maul struck where no lightsaber could defend. On Mandalore, he captured Duchess Satine Kryze, the woman Obi-Wan had loved. Maul impaled her with the darksaber directly in front of Obi-Wan, deliberately mirroring the way he had killed Qui-Gon years earlier. This was not a duel. It was psychological warfare. Obi-Wan was imprisoned and eventually rescued by Bo-Katan's Night Owls. But the wound Maul left that day went far beyond anything a lightsaber could inflict. Maul had weaponized emotion itself, and he believed it would destroy Obi-Wan permanently. It did not. In time, Obi-Wan would master what Maul never could: control. Yet 17 years later on Tatooine, Obi-Wan proved that none of it had broken him. Maul tracked him to the desert by manipulating Ezra Bridger. When they stood face to face, Obi-Wan dismissed Maul's philosophy of domination as ultimately empty. He only ignited his lightsaber when Maul realized he was protecting someone. Then came the sequence that demonstrated everything Obi-Wan had become. He shifted between stances, moving from Soresu to his own guard before settling into his former master's Ataru stance, saber held to the side in an open posture. Each shift was a message. Soresu said he could defend against anything Maul had. Ataru said he made peace with the form that had cost him Qui-Gon. And the open posture said he was not afraid. Where Maul approached this duel fueled by 30 years of hatred, Obi-Wan approached it with 30 years of patience. He was not trying to overpower Maul, he was waiting for Maul to overpower himself. The final switch was a deliberate trap. By adopting Qui-Gon's form, Obi-Wan baited Maul into attempting the same hilt strike that had killed Qui-Gon decades earlier. Maul took the bait. Obi-Wan anticipated the strike, countered it, and slashed through Maul's blade and across his chest in a single motion, 3 strikes in under 4 seconds. He cradled the dying Maul. With his final breath, Maul asked about the one Obi-Wan was protecting and found peace in learning it was the chosen one. 30 years of warfare, grief, and psychological torment ended in 4 seconds of absolute clarity. He won because he no longer fought for dominance. He fought with certainty. Maul, for all his rage and raw power, never achieved that clarity. The Force had guided every motion. All Obi-Wan had to do was listen. Maul never learned how. And that certainty would next be tested against a threat unlike anything Soresu had faced before. 4 lightsabers wielded simultaneously by a single opponent. Chapter 4: The Negotiator. Obi-Wan Kenobi was not invincible, and no opponent exposed his weakness more clearly than Count Dooku. On Geonosis, Dooku's Form II dismantled Obi-Wan's defense with elegant precision and left him wounded on the hangar floor. Aboard the Invisible Hand, years later, Obi-Wan's Soresu had improved dramatically, but Dooku adapted. Rather than trying to break the defense with a blade, he used the Force to hurl Obi-Wan across the room and crush him under a balcony. Soresu could hold against virtually any lightsaber. It offered no protection when the weapon was the Force. Every loss sharpened his understanding of his own limitations. Every failure fed directly into the discipline that made his victories possible. But where most Jedi responded to defeat by training harder or fighting more aggressively, Obi-Wan responded by becoming more patient. That patience defined far more than his lightsaber technique. During the Clone Wars, Obi-Wan earned a title that no other Jedi carried. General Grievous himself addressed him by it in Revenge of the Sith, the Negotiator. The name reflected how Obi-Wan approached every conflict. Where other Jedi drew their weapons, Obi-Wan looked for the solution that did not require one. Most Jedi met aggression with aggression. Obi-Wan met it with composure. That difference defined why he survived opponents who overwhelmed others. The contrast with Anakin Skywalker sharpened this distinction further. As Mike Chen's Brotherhood explored, Anakin's connection to the Force was instinctive and overwhelming, letting him feel the solution to a problem before he understood it. Obi-Wan's path was methodical. He studied, prepared, and analyzed every angle before committing to action. Where Anakin relied on instinct, Obi-Wan relied on preparation and patience. Anakin imposed his will on the Force. Obi-Wan let it guide him. Yoda recognized this quality and assigned Obi-Wan one of the most critical tasks in Jedi history, learning the technique of preserving consciousness after death. Not because he was the strongest, because he was the most disciplined. This was the Jedi the Council chose when they needed someone to kill General Grievous. a cyborg warlord who had never been defeated in sustained combat. Chapter 5. Only One Jedi. General Grievous was not a Force user, but he had killed more Jedi than most Sith Lords in galactic history. The cyborg warlord carried stolen blades as trophies, each one taken from a Jedi he had personally defeated. His cybernetic body had been engineered for combat, with lightsaber dueling as one of its primary functions. 4 arms allowed him to wield 4 weapons simultaneously, spinning them at speeds that staggered even experienced Jedi Masters. His mechanical frame felt no fatigue and no pain. Against Grievous, traditional lightsaber dueling became a survival exercise. The Jedi Council understood this threat intimately. Obi-Wan Kenobi faced Grievous more than any other Jedi during the Clone Wars. Their encounters stretched across numerous engagements with mixed results. Grievous escaped repeatedly. In some encounters, he captured Obi-Wan outright. In others, Obi-Wan gained the upper hand only for the general to flee before the fight could conclude. Neither could finish the other. But when the time came to end Grievous permanently, the Council did not send Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, whose raw strength in the Force dwarfed nearly everyone in the Order. They did not send Mace Windu, the Order's most feared duelist and co-creator of the lethal Vapad form. They sent Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Jedi whose composure and defensive mastery made him uniquely suited for an opponent built to overwhelm aggression. In a duel defined by endurance, not dominance, Obi-Wan was the strongest choice they had. Grievous fought with 4 lightsabers in aggressive, relentless flurries designed to shatter an opponent's guard through sheer volume. Most combat forms cannot sustain defense against that kind of multi-blade assault. Soresu could, and no one embodied it more completely. Its emphasis on tight, efficient defense from every angle meant it could absorb that pressure without breaking. On Utapau, Obi-Wan dropped behind Grievous from the upper levels of the Sinkhole City with the casual confidence of a veteran. After dispatching Grievous's Magna Guard bodyguards, Obi-Wan faced the general alone. Grievous split his arms into 4 and ignited 4 Jedi blades, spinning the first 2 like rotary saws as intimidation. The assault began immediately. Obi-Wan anchored himself in Soresu and held. The blades came from every direction, high and low, left and right, all 4 striking in rapid sequence. Obi-Wan's lightsaber moved in controlled arcs, deflecting each strike with the minimum energy required. He did not retreat. He did not panic. He studied Grievous's patterns in real time, absorbing the onslaught while waiting for the openings he knew would come. They came. Obi-Wan systematically cut off 2 of Grievous's hands, reducing the assault from 4 blades to 2. He then disarmed Grievous completely. The general, now stripped of every stolen weapon, fled on a wheelbike across Utapau's sinkhole terrain. Obi-Wan pursued on his Varactyl Mount Boga, racing through multiple levels of the city as the 2 traded attacks at high speed. When they clashed again, it was hand to hand. Grievous's cyborg body gave him crushing physical strength that overpowered Obi-Wan in close quarters. But Obi-Wan found an opening and ripped apart Grievous's chest plates, exposing the organic tissue beneath. Hanging from a ledge as Grievous advanced with an electrostaff, Obi-Wan reached through the Force and pulled a fallen blaster to his hand. He fired 5 shots into the exposed cavity, igniting Grievous from within. The general collapsed in flames. Obi-Wan tossed the blaster aside, remarking that the weapon was uncivilized. The Jedi who finally destroyed Grievous did not do it through superior force power or aggressive swordsmanship. He did it through patience, adaptability, and the willingness to abandon his weapon when the moment demanded it. But his greatest test still waited on Mustafar. The opponent there knew every technique Obi-Wan possessed, and carried enough power in the Force to break any defense through will alone. Chapter 6. Mustafar's Duel. The duel on Mustafar was the longest lightsaber fight in the entire Star Wars saga. It stretched approximately 11 minutes and 42 seconds across the interior of the Separatist control facility, along metal walkways suspended over rivers of lava. across floating collection platforms and a volcanic embankment where the fight finally reached its conclusion. No other duel in the films came close to this scale. But the length was not the spectacle for its own sake. It was a direct consequence of how well these two fighters knew each other. They had trained together, sparred together, and fought side by side for over 13 years. Obi-Wan had watched Anakin grow from a 9-year-old boy on Tatooine into the most gifted Jedi of his generation. Anakin had learned nearly everything he knew about lightsaber combat under Obi-Wan's guidance. That mutual knowledge turned what should have been a decisive confrontation into a grinding war of attrition that neither could end. Anakin Skywalker fought with Form V Soresu. His connection to the dark side amplified the Form's raw power and aggressive counterattacks. His swings carried more force than they ever had before, and his speed and endurance had been pushed beyond their natural limits by rage. He was younger, faster, mechanically stronger, and fueled by a connection to the Force that Obi-Wan could not match. Obi-Wan fought with Soresu. He gave ground deliberately, maintaining his guard while conserving energy that Anakin was spending freely. And he waited. This was a war between two opposing philosophies made physical. Anakin attacked with the belief that enough power would eventually shatter any defense. Obi-Wan defended with the knowledge that enough patience would eventually expose any flaw. For minutes that stretched across the entire facility, the two remained locked in a combat loop that neither could break. Every combination Anakin launched, Obi-Wan had already seen in training. Every defensive pattern Obi-Wan employed, Anakin had already studied for years. The environment itself became a weapon as the duel moved beyond the facility and onto the lava fields. Floating platforms carried them down rivers of molten rock. Collection arms swung overhead as both combatants leaped between unstable surfaces. The heat alone would have been unbearable for anyone not sustained by the Force. Lava eruptions forced constant repositioning, turning the battlefield into something no amount of sparring could have prepared them for. Through all of it, Obi-Wan maintained his composure. He continued doing exactly what Soresu demanded: survive, observe, and wait for the moment his opponent's discipline broke. That moment came on the embankment above the lava river. Obi-Wan reached stable ground on the high slope. He told Anakin that the fight was over and that he held the advantage, but Anakin, consumed by rage and absolute certainty in his own power, attempted a leaping flip over Obi-Wan's position. Obi-Wan met the leap with a single clean strike and severed Anakin's left arm and both legs in one motion. The stronger Jedi attacked, the wiser Jedi waited. Only one of those philosophies survived Mustafar. Power without control burns itself out. The Chosen One lay burning at the lava's edge. Obi-Wan stood above him. What followed carried the weight of everything they had been to each other. Obi-Wan told Anakin that he had been the Chosen One, that he had been his brother. Anakin responded only with hatred. Obi-Wan collected Anakin's lightsaber and walked away, unable to deliver the killing blow against the man he had raised and fought beside since boyhood. The Jedi who could outlast any opponent in combat could not bring himself to end this one. It was the one battle Soresu could not win, because the enemy was someone Obi-Wan still loved. Darth Vader survived Mustafar because Obi-Wan Kenobi cannot stop being who he was. And the cost of that mercy would not become clear until a decade later, when the man he had left burning came back to find him. Chapter 7: Broken Exile. 10 years after Mustafar, Obi-Wan Kenobi was a broken man. He lived in hiding on Tatooine, watching over the young Luke Skywalker from a distance while working as a meat cutter in the desert heat. Training and meditation had stopped years ago. His connection to the Force had severely weakened. Guilt over Anakin's fall consumed him. He tried repeatedly to reach Qui-Gon Jinn through the Force, but every attempt failed. The connection he needed most remained blocked by the grief he cannot release. When an Inquisitor named Reva orchestrated the kidnapping of young Leia Organa, Bail Organa turned to the only Jedi he trusted. The scheme lured Obi-Wan off Tatooine and back into the open, where Darth Vader was waiting. Their first confrontation in a decade took place on Mapuzo, and it was barely a fight. Obi-Wan Soresu had degraded severely after 10 years of inactivity. Vader overpowered him effortlessly, dragging him through fire and leaving him burned and barely conscious. The man who had once stood above Vader on Mustafar was now helpless. But the mission to protect Leia gave Obi-Wan something he had lacked since Mustafar, a reason to fight that pointed forward rather than backward. He was no longer carrying guilt, he was carrying responsibility. That shift changed everything. To protect the Path Network, Obi-Wan lured Vader to a desolate, rocky moon for a second confrontation. Vader again gained the early advantage and buried Obi-Wan alive under tons of rock and debris. In darkness, Obi-Wan reached for the one thing that still mattered. He focused on memories of Luke and Leia, the children he had sworn to protect. That emotional connection reignited his bond with the Force in a surge that blasted the rubble away. Vader acknowledged that his strength had returned. Defense had always been his foundation, now it had something to stand on. What followed was a very different Obi-Wan entirely. He shifted from defense to furious offense, pelting Vader with Force-hurled rocks before closing the distance with his lightsaber. One decisive slash cut through Vader's helmet, exposing the scarred face of Anakin Skywalker beneath. The Jedi who once relied almost entirely on defense now demonstrated power that rivaled the Sith Lord he had trained. What changed was not his power, it was that he stopped trying to carry it alone. Obi-Wan, weeping, told Vader that he was sorry for everything that had happened. Vader made his position clear. Anakin Skywalker was gone, destroyed by his own hand. Obi-Wan called Vader by his Sith name, not Anakin, and said goodbye. Then he walked away for the second time, again choosing not to deliver the killing blow, but this time the choice was not born from inability, it was born from closure. With that burden lifted, the silence finally broke. On Tatooine, the Force ghost of Qui-Gon Jinn appeared before Obi-Wan for the first time. The master he had been calling to for 10 years had been present all along, waiting for Obi-Wan to find the peace necessary to perceive him. Now the training could begin. This was the final lesson of Obi-Wan Kenobi's journey. The Force Ghost technique demanded exactly what Soresu had always demanded: surrender. Not the defeat of an enemy, but the release of the self, so complete that consciousness could persist beyond death. The Padawan who had once clung to rage on Naboo, the master who had clung to grief on Tatooine, finally learned to cling to nothing at all. And what that surrender ultimately meant for Obi-Wan and for the legacy of the Jedi would become clear only in the moments before his final breath. Chapter 8: Living Force. On the Death Star 19 years after the fall of the Republic, Obi-Wan Kenobi faced Darth Vader for the last time. The duel itself was brief and measured. There were no acrobatic leaps, no explosive changes of power. Two old enemies met in a corridor with lightsabers drawn, and for a few moments the blades connected in slow, deliberate strikes. Stormtroopers gathered at the edges of the hangar bay to watch. Obi-Wan was no longer fighting to win, he was not even fighting to survive, he was fighting to buy time. Luke Skywalker and his companions needed to reach the Millennium Falcon. Obi-Wan held his ground in the corridor, keeping Vader engaged while the escape unfolded behind them. Vader pressed forward with heavy strikes, but Obi-Wan absorbed each one without yielding ground. When he saw that Luke had reached the ship, Obi-Wan did something no other Jedi in the saga had done before. He raised his lightsaber in front of his face, closed his eyes, and stopped fighting entirely. Vader's blade passed through him. His body vanished. His robes fell empty to the floor. It was the ultimate act of Soresu, defense through sacrifice itself. He removed himself from the battlefield so completely that the enemy had nothing left to strike. The technique Yoda had entrusted to him years earlier was now complete. Obi-Wan Kenobi became one with the Force. his consciousness preserved beyond death, able to guide the next generation from a place no Sith could follow. The journey that led to this moment stretched back decades. A Padawan dangling over a reactor shaft on Naboo found calm when everything demanded panic, and killed a Sith Lord with a single motion. Over the years that followed, a Jedi Knight abandoned the aggressive form that had failed his master and devoted his life to a defensive discipline that thrived on patience. On Mustafar, a Jedi Master refused to match the Chosen One's aggression and defeated him by outlasting him. Buried alive under tons of rock a decade later, a broken exile reconnected with the Force by remembering what he was protecting rather than what he had lost. And on the Death Star, an old warrior let go of life itself so that the next generation could survive. Obi-Wan Kenobi was never average. His path was simply different from the path of raw power that defined Anakin Skywalker, Mace Windu, and Yoda. He chose patience over dominance, trust over control, and surrender over force. He mastered something that strength alone can never teach, and it allowed him to transcend death itself. No other Jedi of his generation surrendered to the Force so completely and survived it. For those who want to go deeper, we covered why the Jedi Council believed only Obi-Wan could defeat General Grievous. We also explored what Darth Vader felt immediately after he struck Obi-Wan down, and why that moment haunted him. Both are linked below.